Imagine this. It's late evening in Yosemite National Park. The forest is quiet but not peaceful. The air feels heavy like the world is holding its breath. You're miles from the nearest road, surrounded by cliffs that rise like walls of stone, and shadows that stretch longer with every step. The only sound is the crunch of your boots on the dirt path. No cell service. No lights. No way back but forward. Then, just as you think the silence is complete, it happens. Static. A crackle cuts through the night from an old ranger's radio, one you almost forgot you were carrying. At first it's nothing but white noise, but then a voice pushes through. Broken. Desperate. Calling for help. You freeze. Your blood runs cold. Because the name that voice gives, the identity it claims, belongs to someone who vanished here 8 years ago. Someone who was never supposed to be heard from again. Now, what would you do in that moment? Would you follow the signal into the unknown? Or would you turn back and pretend you never heard it? This is the kind of story that feels almost too close for comfort. A story about how quickly the wilderness can turn from breathtaking to terrifying. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next mystery we explore. Because the one you're about to hear tonight is the kind of story that lingers long after the screen goes dark. Michael Turner wasn't just another name lost in Yosemite's vast missing persons files. He was a man with a story, with a life that mattered. And that's exactly why his disappearance rattled everyone who knew him. At 42, Michael was the kind of person people leaned on. A mechanical engineer by profession, meticulous and careful, yet outdoors he was free-spirited. Nature was his reset button. His wife Claire once said, "He was never more alive than when he was outside." Every summer, Michael planned a family camping trip, teaching his 2 children how to pitch tents, build campfires and spot constellations. He loved telling them about Orion, about how the stars had guided travelers for centuries. One day he promised he'd take them deep into Yosemite, far from any city lights, so they could see the Milky Way as it truly was. But that trip never came. On a warm July morning in 2007, Michael set out for a solo hike. Nothing extreme, just a familiar trail he'd walked before. He left Claire a handwritten note on the counter, "Back by dinner." It was the kind of small promise he always kept. For the first few hours, everything went as expected. A fellow hiker later recalled hearing Michael on his radio saying the view from the ridge was incredible, almost like standing at the edge of the world. His voice was calm, steady. That was the last time anyone heard from him. When he didn't return that evening, Claire called the rangers. Within hours, search teams were in motion. Helicopters scanned the ridges, volunteers combed the trails. Dogs picked up scents that seemed to lead deeper into the cliffs. They found scattered signs. A trail of boot prints that stopped suddenly at a patch of granite. A dented water bottle lodged between rocks. What looked like the remains of a small fire already cold. But no Michael. It was as if the wilderness had swallowed him whole. 4 days, then weeks, the search continued. Every new lead ended in silence. The park, so beautiful in daylight, turned menacing at night. Shadows stretched into shapes that seemed to follow the searchers. Rangers whispered about how often people vanished in Yosemite without explanation. And here's why this story is worth staying with until the end. By the time we're finished, you'll understand not only how Michael's disappearance connected to a disturbing pattern of other missing hikers, but also how a single overlooked clue, one most people dismissed, finally unlocked an answer nearly a decade later. But back then all his family had was grief. Claire returned to the trailhead every weekend, leaving notes pinned to the ranger board. "Michael, we're waiting for you. Don't give up." His children grew up visiting Yosemite not for vacations but for vigils. Months passed. The search wound down. And the official word was delivered. Michael Turner was gone. Declared dead. The case was over. Or at least, it should have been. Because 8 years later, out of nowhere, on a forgotten radio frequency, Michael's voice broke through the static. Desperate. Begging for help. And that's where the nightmare truly began. 8 years is a long time. Long enough for memories to blur, for a family to grieve, and for the world to quietly move on. Michael Turner's name had faded from headlines. The official reports gathered dust in Yosemite's ranger office. To most people he was just another tragic entry in the long list of hikers who never came back. But to his wife Claire and to his now teenage kids, the absence was still raw. Every empty chair at dinner, every holiday photo without him, it never stopped hurting. And then on an otherwise ordinary night, the impossible broke through. Two amateur radio operators in Fresno, testing old equipment during a thunderstorm, caught a signal on a frequency that hadn't been used in years. At first it sounded like interference, sharp bursts of static, the kind that usually meant lightning strikes. But then between the cracks of noise, came something unmistakable. A man's voice. Strained. Ragged. Desperate. Is Michael Turner. Trapped. Help me. The operators froze. The name was burned into one of their memories. He'd read about Turner's disappearance years earlier. He thought it had to be a prank. But then the voice repeated, weaker this time, as if fading in and out of existence. The men replayed the recording over and over. It wasn't just the words that chilled them, it was the tone. The kind of voice you only hear when someone is barely holding on. When the clip leaked online it spread fast. Some dismissed it as a hoax, an elaborate trick. But others believed. Comment sections filled with theories. Was Turner alive, hidden somewhere in Yosemite's vast wilderness all this time? Was the voice a residual echo, a strange natural phenomenon, like the mountain itself had recorded him? Or was this something darker? For Claire and her children it wasn't theory. It was hope. Claire described it later as a voice pulling me out of grief by the throat. After years of mourning, she suddenly had a reason to believe her husband was still out there. But the signal wasn't stable. It would vanish for days, then return suddenly at odd hours, like a ghost breaking through static. And every time it grew more desperate. Stark, please. Then came the night that changed everything. For the first time, the transmission wasn't just words. It carried a sequence of numbers, repeated 3 times before the signal cut to silence. 37.7459. 119.5332. 37.7459. 119.5332. The operators traced them, mapping the digits against Yosemite's rugged terrain. What they saw made their blood run cold. The coordinates pointed to a remote section of the park, an area closed off to the public. An area with its own unsettling history of disappearances. And that's where the new search began. But what they found when they arrived there was far stranger than anyone could have prepared for. The coordinates spread like wildfire online. Reddit threads lit up. Amateur detectives swapped theories. Some said the numbers pointed to an old ranger station that had been shut down. Others claimed it was a burial ground. Within a week, a search team formed, part official, part volunteer. Rangers, curious locals, survivalists, and a pair of journalists hungry for a story. At the center of it all, Claire Turner, Michael's wife, insisted on joining. If it really is him, she said quietly, I have to be there. Before the team left, Yosemite officials gave a final warning. That area is unstable. Landslides, sinkholes, no safe paths. But that wasn't all. One older ranger added in a low voice. You think Michael was the first to vanish there? He wasn't. Some places don't want to be found. It should have been enough to stop them. Instead, it only made them more determined. They hiked out at dawn. The first hours were manageable. Dense forest, rocky slopes, nothing unusual. But as they pushed farther, the terrain shifted. Trees grew closer together, gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching across like skeletal arms. The air itself seemed heavier, harder to breathe. By noon, even the birds had gone silent. No chirps, no buzzing insects, not even the rustle of squirrels. Just the crunch of boots on dead leaves, and the unshakable feeling of being watched. 2 miles in, the discoveries began. A single boot print in the mud. Too crisp to be from 8 years ago. A torn strip of plaid fabric snagged on a low branch. Then by a dried creek bed, something worse. A weather-beaten backpack. Inside, a waterlogged wallet with Turner's ID, a crumpled map of the park, and a notebook. But here was the chilling part. Half the pages were ruined by water. But the last entries were written in clear, legible ink. The handwriting matched Turner's. The final line read, "Still moving. Still here. Don't stop." That night, as they set up camp near the marked coordinates, one of the volunteers pulled out a portable radio. The group huddled around the crackling static, half expecting nothing. Then it came. The same strained, breaking voice. "Colder now, hurry." Claire dropped the radio, her face pale. "That's him," she whispered. But here's the detail no one expected. The voice didn't sound like it was 8 years old. It sounded live. At dawn, GPS led them straight to the exact spot. 37.7459, minus 119.5332. They expected a clearing. Maybe a cave. Instead they found a fence. Old but sturdy, topped with barbed wire. A faded government sign hung crooked on the metal. "Restricted area. Do not enter." Behind it, the land sloped downward into a hollow smothered in fog. The mist moved strangely as if it were alive, thick curls dragging along the ground, swallowing the trees at their base. Someone muttered, "Why would the government seal this place off?" No one had an answer. Ignoring the warnings, they cut the fence. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted them. The mist clung to their boots, damp and freezing. Their flashlights barely cut through the fog, beams swallowed whole within a few feet. Then, another sign of life. A handprint pressed deep into stone. It wasn't weathered. It wasn't old. The grooves were sharp, detailed, undeniably recent. And it wasn't alone. 2 more appeared beside it. Smaller. Like a family had passed through. Claire froze when she saw them. "Michael, and the kids?" She whispered, though her children had never set foot in this part of the park. Her voice cracked. The team exchanged uneasy glances. If the prints were real, it meant someone, or something, was ahead of them. They pushed deeper into the hollow. The fog grew thicker until the trees disappeared completely. And in the silence, just before the ground dropped into darkness, a low sound rose from the mist. Not static. Not the wind. Something else. Something breathing. And that's when the group realized they weren't alone in the hollow. The descent into the hollow felt less like a hike and more like crossing into another world. The mist swallowed their bodies whole, erasing the forest behind them until it felt as though there was no way back. Every step sank into damp soil that squelched beneath their boots, the smell of rot rising with each movement. The air was heavy, unnaturally cold, sharp in the lungs like they were breathing through ice. Then faint at first came the sound. A low, steady rhythm that blended with the hush of the fog. At first they told themselves it was the wind sneaking through the rocks. But the longer they listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't the wind at all. It was breathing. Slow, ragged human breathing. The first discovery came like a punch to the gut. Lying half buried in the soil was a shredded sleeping bag. The fabric split wide down the middle, torn apart as if slashed open. Next to it, almost swallowed by the dirt, was a flashlight. Its lens was cracked, its casing dented, but the faintest beam of light still pulsed from it. One of the volunteers bent to pick it up, then froze when he recognized the model. His voice dropped to a whisper. This didn't even exist 8 years ago. The meaning was undeniable. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. Before anyone could process the weight of it, the portable radio hissed to life. The sound of static filled the hollow, jagged and alive, until a voice pushed through. It was clearer now, more immediate, as if carried not from a distance but from just beyond the veil of fog. "Down here. Help me." Claire's breath caught. She grabbed the radio with both hands, her knuckles bone white. "Michael!" She screamed, her voice cracking, echoing through the mist. "Michael, we're here. We're here." The response came after a pause so long it felt like the world itself had frozen. Then softly, brokenly came his reply. "Don't come closer. It's not safe." The words didn't bring relief. They sank like ice into every chest. The mist shifted as though reacting, curling backward to reveal a jagged split in the rock wall. A tunnel. Its edges were gouged and scarred, as if something had clawed or forced its way through. The stench that rolled out was unbearable. Damp earth mixed with the metallic tang of blood and decay. The sound of breathing grew louder from within, steady and insistent, as though the hollow itself was alive. The team moved cautiously, their flashlights trembling in their hands. Just inside the tunnel, the beam of light fell across the stone. Words had been scrawled there in what looked like soot or ash, letters smeared and uneven, "Still here." Below the words, a handprint pressed into the wall. Fresh. Damp. The grooves of the palms still glistened in the weak light. The tunnel opened into a cavern, its walls dripping with moisture, the air colder still. And there, slumped against the rock, they saw him. A man. His beard was tangled, his face pale and hollow, his clothes shredded into rags. Yet his eyes were the same eyes Claire had memorized every night in her dreams. Her voice broke as the word tore out of her throat. Michael. His head lifted slowly, trembling with effort. His lips cracked as he spoke, voice hoarse and broken. You shouldn't have come. Before anyone could respond, the sound came. A scrape against stone. Then another. Followed by a chorus of faint whispers, overlapping and low, rising from deeper in the cavern. The rescuers swung their flashlights toward the darkness. And that's when they saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Half hidden in the shadows, crouched against the walls, standing in unnatural stillness. Their faces were lost in darkness, but their eyes, pale, glassy, glinting in the light, stared back in unison. Silent. Watching. Waiting. Claire clutched the radio to her chest, her legs trembling. Michael wasn't alone in that cavern. And whatever else was there, was awake. For a moment no one dared to breathe. The cavern pulsed with silence, broken only by the steady drip of water echoing off the stone. Claire's flashlight shook in her grip, the beam sweeping across the pale, unmoving faces that lined the walls. Dozens of them. Men. Women. Hikers who had vanished without explanation. Their clothes were tattered, their bodies lean, but their eyes, unnaturally bright, never left the intruders. Claire's instincts screamed to run, but Michael's voice, weak and urgent, cut through the rising panic. Listen to me. They're not what they were. They've been kept here. Fed, broken, controlled. He wouldn't let them leave. The he needed no name. Everyone in the hollow knew who Michael meant. David Clark. The man in the uniform. The predator who had turned Yosemite into his hunting ground. Michael tried to stand, but his body gave out. Claire rushed to his side, clutching him as though afraid he would vanish again if she let go. His skin was icy, his breath shallow, but he was alive. Truly alive. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "We're taking you home." Behind them, the figures stirred, their whispers rising into a rustling murmur that crawled along the walls. The rescuers, hearts pounding, edged backward toward the tunnel. But none of the pale-eyed watchers moved. Not one step. It was as if they were tethered to the hollow, bound by something unseen. As the team began guiding Michael toward the tunnel, his hand clamped around Claire's wrist with surprising force. His voice was raw but steady. "Don't forget them. Don't let them stay lost like I did." The words branded themselves into her soul. The escape from the hollow was a blur. Flashlights bobbing, boots slamming against stone, the oppressive mist clutching at their shoulders as if reluctant to let them go. Only when the cool night air of Yosemite hit their faces did they realize they'd made it out. Claire collapsed to her knees, Michael cradled against her, sobbing as relief tore through her body. Days later, investigators swarmed the site. They unearthed journals, equipment caches, and crude restraints, evidence of how Clark had hidden victims in the hollow over years. But the figures Claire and the rescuers swore they'd seen? When the cave was searched again, it was empty. No pale eyes. No whispers. Only the cold echo of dripping water and the faint scrawled words on the wall. Still here. Michael, weak but alive, was reunited with his family. His story unraveled Clark's crimes piece by piece, providing the closure that so many families had been denied. Clark was arrested, tried, and sentenced. His betrayal of trust burned into history as one of the darkest chapters of the National Park Service. Yet for Claire, closure was not so simple. At night, when the world grew quiet, she swore she could still hear it. The faint crackle of Michael's radio signal, the weak voice cutting through static. A reminder of the 8 years he spent waiting in the dark. And sometimes, if she let her thoughts wander too far, she remembered the eyes in the cavern, dozens of them watching from the shadows. Were they ever really there? Or had the hollow simply shown them what it wanted them to see? Michael's recovery brought peace to some, but the wilderness still held its secrets. Yosemite, vast and eternal, doesn't surrender everything. And maybe, just maybe, some cries for help are never meant to be silenced. Because sometimes the mountains remember more than we want them to. In the end, Michael Turner's survival gave his family the closure they had begged the wilderness for, and the man behind the horror, David Clark, was finally brought to justice. But Yosemite is a place that does not easily give up its secrets. The hollow still whispers and the mountains still keep their silence. Which leaves us with one haunting question. How many more voices are still waiting to be heard? And here's something to think about. If you were the one out there lost in the dark, would the wilderness return you to the world? Or would it keep you forever? Thank you for watching this far into the story. It means more than you know. Stories like this are not just about mystery, they're about resilience, survival, and the shadows of human nature. By staying with me until the end, you've proven that you're not just a viewer. You're part of this community, one that refuses to look away when the truth hides in the dark. So before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you'll never miss the next story. Because trust me, the next one is even darker.